There we go. Great. So hi, everyone. My name's James. I am the chair of the Young Fabians, and tonight we're going to be having a session on speech writing with Paul Richards. So I'm going to pass over to Paul, who is over here, and over to him.
Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone at home. Hello, everyone here. So my name is Paul Richards. I'm a long-standing Fabian. I've got a long-standing relationship with the Young Fabians. I think on your website I'm billed as some sort of honorary vice president or some such thing.
Yes.
I know.
You are.
I mean, that's a title I use in all my stationery, and and I was once the secretary to the Young Fabians a long time ago, as well. And my sort of CV, my political CV is fairly typical, I suppose. So I've stood in Parliament a couple of times and chaired the actual Fabian Society after many years on the executive. And I work with many Labour MPs writing speeches and helping them with their media, do media training as well. And I used to be what's called a special advisor when we had Labour government. So I worked for two different secretaries of state in three different departments underneath two different Labour prime ministers. So that, I remember even thinking at the time, that's quite a privilege and not one that will necessarily be happening again anytime soon. Thus it proved at last. So I've had just a lifelong fascination with speeches and speech writing. I like all kinds of political writing, but speeches in particular. And it's always struck me that it's quite unusual that a form of communication as old and traditional as a person speaking to an audience is still the way we judge our political leaders. And we were just talking about, candidates going forward for hustings. Well, isn't that a strange thing to test somebody on? Their ability to stand up and speak and answer questions and not fall over and, not stumble over their words. And the same with the way we judge, Prime Minister's questions or the big conference speech that the leaders make, or shadow cabinet or whatever. It's still something we take terribly seriously. And if you ever watch any time in Parliament, you will know that most of the speeches are terrible, aren't they? If you watch it for more than about half an hour, they are mostly awful. And that breaks my heart, really, because there's a few things you can do with a speech to make a bad speech into an okay speech, and some more things you can do to make an okay speech into a brilliant speech. It's not magic. I wrote a speech with Meg Hillier once, and she came back. It was a big sort of conference on the environment. She came back. She said, "I can't believe this. There's people queuing up to talk to me at the end. There was somebody in tears on the front row, and a big round of applause. They all liked all the things I said, And I said, "Well, it's not magic. It's just a well-written speech with rhetorical devices that work with the human brain to get those kind of reactions, So ever since she's been saying, write me a speech like that one again. Never quite managed it, but it's not, it's not hard. So what we're going to look at in the next, I don't know, about an hour, something like that.
Yeah.
Is all about speeches. Now, there are my books, which I just have to plug, and I haven't done a one at all about speech writing, but the one about Blair is about his speech writing style. So I sort of gave a bit of a study for that for the book, which you can pick these up on second-hand bookshops, I'm sure, all over London. And the election one is totally out of date, so I don't recommend that at all. It's an analog world. This is the first time I ever spoke at the Labour Party conference. See if you can spot me.
Oh yeah, all right.
I know, isn't that terrifying? I mean, that looks like a historic document, doesn't it? And indeed it is. Roy Pattersley, Barbara Castle, Jack Cunningham, Neil Kinnock, Joan Lester, and me, rather bizarrely. And I was terrified. It was a very easy gig. It was like the youngest delegate, and Barbara Castle was the oldest delegate. So it was a relatively easy gig, but I was terrified. And even despite everything, I sort of got through it. Coming off the stage, off the platform, I stumbled and almost fell over in front of everybody. It's just the most humiliating thing. And then when people watched it on television at home, they said they cut away to an interview with Tony Benn while I was speaking, and the only bit they cut back for was me falling over on the stage. So that was like early communication. And this was me speaking at Labour Party conference about 2 years ago. You may want to just note the fact that I've lost 6 stone since then. I know. So I do practice what I preach. I do speak at things myself, and I do also. I was the Police and Crime Commissioner candidate last time round in unwinnable Sussex, so I do try and do the politics as well as talk about it. So what are we going to talk about? Why speeches, structure, rhetorical devices, and tricks of the trade. Why do we think speeches matter? Let's workshop this a little bit. And if you at home, if you want to type into the whatever it's called, the chat room thing.
Yeah.
Why do speeches still matter? I said they do, but I mean, why?
To communicate your message clearly.
Yeah, definitely about communicating your message clearly. Good. What else?
Character across.
Yeah. And how does a speech get your character across?
suppose your energy levels,
Yeah,
your humour,
yeah,
Do you bring any kind of vision or optimism?
yeah, absolutely. So it's the way to convey emotion, isn't it? And then a sense of emotional content, with hope or fear or whatever it is, definitely. As I said, it's still a test that we apply. And you may recall Ian Duncan Smith, when he was the leader of the Conservative Party, couldn't speak in public very well. And they tried to make a virtue of this stuff by calling him the quiet man, as a sort of, classic turning a negative into a positive. It didn't work, they got rid of him. So, it is something we do do care about. And what do these two pictures on the board signify in terms of why speeches matter? Dipping into your political history, I know a little bit here, but the top one is Cameron, obviously, the bottom one is Barack Obama. But what are the occasions where speeches really do matter?
So on the bottom is that Barack Obama's 2004 conference speech, which gave him a name.
Yeah. I remember I was working in government at the time, and somebody said, just actually before I was working in government, somebody said, oh, there's this bloke, Barack Obama, who the hell's that? And he said, you gotta pay attention to this guy. He's just given the most amazing speech. He's got himself noticed. He's got a saliency. Who knows where he'll end up? And where he ended up was in the White House. So his speech was a breakthrough moment. What about Cameron?
but when he memorised the speech,
Yeah. So do you remember again? I know this is history rather than memory, but what was the occasion?
was this with leadership?
Yeah, it was. It was the leadership contest against David Davis, and David Davis was the front runner in the Conservative leadership contest. And both candidates went to do that. It was like an informal hustings of a Conservative Party conference. And Cameron gave a very tough message to Tories about losing and winning and why they had to sort themselves out, and gave it quite an unvarnished version. David Davis gave a sort of rah-rah, we're all Conservatives, yippee. And the smart money sort of shifted onto Cameron, and so the tough messaging after so many defeats actually resonated far more. So sometimes in a speech you have to be a bit tough, don't you, and tell people things they don't want to hear necessarily. Not all of it, otherwise that's not, not a great way to communicate. But you do need a bit of grit in the oyster, I would say. And if you read it now, and I advise you do, it's a very well constructed speech. Now, do you think he really, memorized it? I mean, he had chunks of it in his head, but I bet he had a little note somewhere just in case. So my early top tip is never go out in front of an audience without a safety net. So even if you are pretending to speak without notes, in inverted commas, I never advise it.
Would you like to fill it out? Make sure that ruin your whole.
Well, if you forget what you're saying, you might want to do that.
Didn't Miliband try
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
and he forgot to talk about the deficit or something like that?
He's got two sections of his speech. One was on immigration, and one was on the deficit of the economy. And his problem was the first year he spoke as leader, he did it without notes, and everyone went, wow, including me in the room. Wow, that's incredible. What a feat of memory and high wire act, doing that. Second year he did it, and that's still good, brilliant. Third year, fantastic. Fourth year, he forgot half of it. And so all that hard work just undermined straight away. And the problem was that, of course, the briefing that had been given out to the media, so the journalists had got a script of the speech in advance, had this section in. So you couldn't even say, oh, well, I was going to address that in a day or whatever. I didn't need to mention it. They knew full well he'd forgotten it. So never, ever risk it, I would say. Gordon Brown strode out to the stage once where his auto cue failed. So he had a hard copy in his pocket, thank heavens, and to do an old-fashioned tub thumping, his own chancellor, tub thumping speech. So always have a safety net. So speeches can make the weather, they establish your leadership, they can drive the news. I mean, often we have a symbiosis between news coverage and big speeches, don't we? So build up to a big speech, and then the analysis and the post-match analysis afterwards. They should fit into a broader communications plan. So even at the level of a local selection or something, it's it's part of a plan of messaging and reaching out. And they can make history occasionally. So again, over to the people online and in the room, what do you think makes a great speech? What are some of the characteristics that you think? Can you monitor the inbox just in case anyone does decide to join in?
Yeah, I've got the chat. So yeah, I will be able to see if people do message. Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, there's the chat. There we go.
Cool.
Oh yeah, come on, share screen. I share the slides.
Yes, slides. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we can maybe like slightly more closer, but yeah.
So
Yeah,
go on then.
yeah.
What makes a good speech? It's fine. Useless son.
Maybe. Got communicating quite complex ideas.
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing clever, is there, about trying to sound complicated? And you must have seen this in academic settings, where academics sometimes try and use convoluted language, academic language, sometimes use 5 words where 2 will do, to sort of elevate what they're saying. And often what they're saying is actually quite simple and straightforward, but there's this need to elevate it. In a great speech, it's the opposite, isn't it? It's complex ideas expressed simply. Get Brexit done, whatever it might be. Very simple. And you may say, well, isn't that just dumbing down and somebody's trying to get in at the back there.
Thank you.
Alexander, I happen to know. And so there's nothing dumb about simple language. It's actually quite hard to do it. This is why the journalists on The Sun and the Mirror tend to have, first class degrees from Oxford and Cambridge, because to write for a mass audience in simple terms, in a way they want to understand, it's quite hard. Who are the great communicators that you can think of that have managed that? Welcome to Alexander, by the way. Hello. Welcome.
I wouldn't say like a great communicator, but who was the during the COVID briefing? There was one of Patrick Fallon, Witty, they were quite like sciencey and nerdy. There was another one
with his metaphors.
Yeah, you can explain it like football terms all the time. And I love them.
Jonathan Van Tam.
ABT.
Yeah, and again, if you can do that, if you use metaphor, imagery, symbolism, things that sort of explain things in everyday terms, then that cuts through, doesn't it? And obviously, dealing with a scientific topic like COVID is terribly hard. What else makes a great speech? Are you joining in? What are some of the nuts and bolts things? If you're, all of you are writing speeches, I imagine, or thinking about writing speeches for yourself or for other people. Yeah. So if you're approaching that task, what do you think about?
I think one thing is humor.
Yeah.
So if you don't use humor, the audience, you'll be able to get a reaction from the audience.
Yeah.
And it does a quiet reception, even if it's such a great speech, but there's no humor.
Yeah.
It feels like they haven't really got
Be a bit
something
dry.
that they deserve. Really.
What are the obvious pitfalls of humor then, having said that?
Not reading the room.
I think there are several. One is not being funny, just having tumbleweed. Another is being just not connecting with the room and saying something off colour, or just that goes the wrong way, or sort of offensive, or whatever. And my advice is always don't set up jokes with punchlines in terms of humour. So you can be funny, but if you go into the vernacular of a joke, 3 men walking to a pub or whatever, there's a kind of a massive expectation then for the punchline. If you don't get a laugh on that line, get it. And as I always say, if you can write humour and get a laugh, move to Hollywood. Give up politics, you'll be very happy and successful. It's a rare, wonderful gift, isn't it? I did a comedy writing course during COVID online, hoping that I get some tips for speech writing, and all I learned was I can't write comedy. It's really, really, really hard to write comedy. It's why the people that do it are brilliant, aren't they? Anyway, so humour but not jokes is my takeaway from that. What else makes a great speech?
Rhythm, kind of the pace of the speech.
Yeah, and that's a terribly important point, isn't it? This is the opposite of writing a policy document, a Fabian pamphlet, dare I say, an article, a blog. It's about the musicality of it, about the rhythm, the pace, the tempo, the cadence, the pauses, some of the language, the poetry. But it's not about headings and sentences with full stops, and it's the rules of grammar. You'll be pleased to know just go out the window, don't they? You can have one-word sentences. You can have sentences that are allied into the next sentence. You can stop halfway for a dramatic effect. You can do all kinds of things more like music than writing. That mean those kind of basic rules disappear. And if you ever see an actual transcript of a speech, sometimes it is really odd, isn't it? It doesn't read very well. The very famous example from years and years and years ago was John Prescott defending one member, one vote in the Labour Party in support of John Smith, who was trying to get his vote through the Labour Party conference in 1993. And he gave a sort of barnstorming, upbeat kind of, this man, our leader, was putting his head on the block and all this sort of stuff, with imagery and everything. if you read it afterwards, it was just garbage. It made no sense at all. It had just no logical flow. The sentences didn't make sense. But the impression, the noise, and the kind of power, and the fact it was him at all doing it, somebody of the union movement, just blew everyone away. So they don't bear reading necessarily, speeches. They're pretty good to listen to. What else makes a great speech? Any other top tips?
We have in the chat, hold on, from Matt. So Matt in the chat says, in the past, I've worked with some speakers who like to speak from bullet points, etc., rather than a written speech. Do you think that's a good idea? How do you deal with speakers who really want to do it?
I would always advise them that they will lose some of the rhetorical devices and some of the poetry and all the things I just talked about if it's just bullet points. It will be a conversational style speech, and it's more like a presentation in that case if they just got bullet points. They will lose some of the passion, I think, from bullet points. I know MPs that demand that, and they don't like a written out speech. What you could think about, though, is doing a written out speech and then reducing it to the bullet points and trying to have the other stuff hanging behind them if they can time to practice it in advance, which they may not always have. But do it that way so that there is something behind it. Otherwise, you're just reading out some bullet points. If somebody's reading out bullet points genuinely, I always think, well, send us an email then, because I can read as well. I haven't been able to since that's what I know the edge, I don't need you to read out your bullet points to me. Where's the connection there? So yeah. Any other top tips? So humor, rhythm, rhetorical devices.
I know we said it's simple, but I also think maybe narrow, because I feel like when you are writing something or when you're saying something, you say lots of different things.
Yeah.
Someone can maybe just hear one part of that, or respond to one part of that. And I think a really good speech or a really good, important presentation needs to reinforce itself rather than kind of spread itself too thin.
Yes, that's true, isn't it? If you try and say 14 things in a speech, then you're not going to say anything, are you? I mean, most successful speeches, I Have a Dream is a good example, rely on a single theme and then repetition of a theme. And then they drill that all the way through, because you can't remember detail from a speech. You can't remember all the words the person has said. If that was the way to communicate information, you would all remember everything you ever got taught at school or university or college, wouldn't you? Do you remember anything you were taught at school? Oxbow legs, 6 words, it's not much, frankly, is it? So, that's not the way to communicate, which is a shame our education system is built on it, isn't it? But there we are. Can we show the video?
Yeah, can do.
Let's see if it works. So this is how to make a bad speech, okay? And if I tell you on YouTube it's Builder's worst speech ever, that gives you a clue. While James is just queuing it up, I'll just give you some context. It's an American politician on the Republican side, and it was ages ago, about 10 years ago, I think. And he is seeking the nomination of a party unit, so the local party in Burnmattress, Arkansas, or I don't know, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. He's seeking to be the candidate to be the county treasurer. So they elect everything, the dog catcher and everything. So we never see the audience, but the room, I imagine, is sort of this. It's maybe 30 people in it, or a hotel suite or something like that. It's not a big auditorium.
Yeah.
It's pretty. Can we get it on there?
We can't really get it on there unless you want to pull it up, and then I can kind of show.
Why don't you just tell you?
I can turn it around and then if I just set this up as well, quickly.
So all I'd like you to do is think about it. It's only about 3 minutes. Think of his content and think about his delivery. And if you think this is marvelous, then I'm afraid we must end the evening there. But if you've got a critique of it, then do share that as well.
Well, I'm just thinking, when you said when you said like obviously
someone on the call just let me know they can see that. That's bad.
You need to be a good writer.
Yeah.
You do need to be.
I don't know if Matt,
but you need to be able to
drop me a
adapt to
text or
different
something. So I know
styles,
you
because once you speak,
about
he's
company
different
parts,
from all the
but
other writers
that's
you
great.
all
Thank
do.
you. Lovely. And if I quickly spin you all round.
So it's about, if you think of it, just as it's the way it lands in the ear, not in the way it lands on the page. It's the sound of it, isn't it?
Magical. Can you guys see that?
Ladies and gentlemen of the Stark County Republican Party Executive Committee, good evening. And thank you not only for your attendance, but for allowing me the opportunity to speak. My name is Phil Davison, and I am seeking my party's nomination for the position of Stark County Treasurer on November 10th, November of 2010, excuse me. In terms of my background, I am from the village of Minerva, where I'm serving my 13th year as of elected service as a Minerva Council member. In terms of education, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology, a bachelor's degree in history, a master's degree in public administration, and a master's degree in communication. In terms of elections across Stark County, I have represented our party twice on the county ballot in both the primary and the general elections. When I ran for Stark County Clerk of Courts in 1996 and Stark County Commissioner in 2000, and I will not apologize for my tone tonight. I have been a Republican since I was good.
Right, shall we? Oh, hang on, there's one more bit. Let's hold on a minute. The Albert Einstein bit's coming up.
One of my most favorite quotes in the history of the spoken word, and it is as follows: in the middle of opportunity, excuse me, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. I'm going to repeat that so I have clarity tonight. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Is the opportunity we've been waiting for.
Okay, let's put him out of our misery, Richard.
That's great.
So, what's going on now? What's going on? What did you notice? Hello?
Is it serious? That's serious.
It's a real thing, and people often ask, is he an actor? Is it a comedy? Yeah, no, he's a real candidate. Do you think he got the selection?
Yes. Yes. Stark County and Matt on the chat has texted me basically just saying strong thick of it vibes. I think we can agree with that.
It's, I mean, he's probably in Trump's cabinet, wasn't he? It's probably, but no, he didn't get selection. What's he trying to do with the audience, first of all? What do you think his aims were?
Just kind of probably show of passion, you know, like,
Yeah.
I'm really up for this, you know.
Yes, exactly. Do you think that level of energy and passion was matched to the size of the room?
We also can really see the room, but yeah, it wasn't like a stadium rally, was it? It was.
And you could argue that if it was a stadium rally, that might have worked. You need a bit of rah-rah at that level of audience, but actually 12 or 13 other people. What about his non-verbals then? How did you judge those? What was he doing?
It's very distracting.
Yeah.
Like his pacing.
Yeah, why was he pacing up and down?
Because he was flapping, he was kind of falling apart.
He was, but why? There's a very good logistical learning point here about why you have to keep pacing up and down.
He didn't know script.
Yeah, he didn't know his script, did he?
No,
And where was his script?
Right in the middle, so you got to go back to it. Yeah.
Suddenly it's behind him. So he comes out from behind the table. That's a good device, by the way, coming out from behind the table, engaging with the audience. And Miliband did that in his selection speech in Doncaster against Michael Duggar. Michael did a club thumping behind the table. He came out to the front and engaged. Won it. Fine, as long as you remember. And he didn't. That's why he makes that funny noise like he's crawling on a mouse and has to run back. Yes.
Logan on the chat says his pacing made him nervous.
Yeah, it looks really unhinged. And he obviously is very nervous and possibly chemically enhanced as well, I suspect, but certainly nervous. What else? What about the quote at the end? Do you remember what he said? What did he say?
Difficulties. Sorry.
Through great challenges, through great difficulty, presents opportunity or something.
Yeah, exactly. And who did he claim had said this?
Einstein.
Einstein. And how did he build it? I mean, how did you build up to, what was his ramp up to that quote?
Part of good times and bad times.
Yes. What did he say about the actual quote?
Favorite quote.
My favorite quote in the spoken word.
Yeah.
It sets a high bar, doesn't it? Now, if you say, I'm going to share with you my favorite quote, then the minimum expectation is you can remember it, isn't it? So he's destroying his own credibility by forgetting it. And you may say, oh, well, you should stumble over the words, but actually you are thinking, I bet you that's not your favorite quote. I bet you got that off the internet this morning. And you're trying to sound clever. If you use quotes in speeches, which is a good thing to do, you link the quote to something to do with the room or the people or you, or it has to have relevance to the event, doesn't it? There has to be some reason why you're quoting. Do we think that this guy is now linked to the Middle European intellectual tradition of the pre-war period because he's quoting Albert Einstein at us? No, of course not. We just think he's an idiot, don't we? So it doesn't make him look cleverer. So you choose quotes wisely and then get them right. And then the final caveat to that is, do you think Albert Einstein really said it?
No.
No, because the internet is awash with fake quotes, isn't it? There's an industry of fake quotery, you know, Orwell, Voltaire, Gandhi, you name it, they've all got fake quotes ascribed to them, and then you hear people say it out loud, and it makes me very angry. And Iron Bevan never ever said the NHS will last for as long as there are folk that will fight for it. Okay, he never said it. It appears in a play written by somebody else in the 1970s, 20 years after he was dead. And I've seen Labour front benches, I've seen it on banners, I've seen it as a quote from an Iron Bevan, and it's just not. He never said it. Now, you know, we seek the truth now. We as Fabians, we're all about evidence and truth and whatever. So just don't do it. Anyway, what else? So bad quoting. What about the pointing?
Aggressive, isn't it?
Yeah. What do the Americans do to avoid the point, by the way? There's a little bit of
It's a thumb of power.
yeah, there is. I was doing this little bit now about that gesture, the sort of closed hand, thumb, pointy emphasis.
I like thumb power. I haven't had thumb power.
I was talking about that in Ghana. Okay. In fact, I had a Ghanaian woman in my course on Saturday at UCL, and I tried this out on her as well. And in Ghana, that is the rudest hand gesture. It's the equivalent of a middle finger or a peace sign or whatever. So I said, well, what does it actually mean? He said, it's something about my mother. She said, and I'm not going to say what, you know. So hand gestures are not always culturally appropriate, are they? You have to really think about hand gestures because, you know, in many cultures, certain gestures are an absolute no-no. And I think can undermine a speech, like basically telling the audience to F off with your hand gestures while you're trying to get them to vote for you. Anything else on that kind of pressure speech?
Maybe the flow. I thought the flow was quite interesting because obviously, I feel like we probably could have got away with it more if it wasn't so.
Well, it's very weird emphasis, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Ballot. My name is Phil Davidson. There was a really odd emphasis all the way through. If you're worried about the person you're writing for or yourself landing the emphasis in the wrong places, how do you help them? What do you do?
Good point. So Michael in the so Matthew in the chat says he seems to forget his own educational background.
Oh, yes,
to suggest he was lying. So
yes, thanks, Matthew. That's exactly right, isn't it? And if you recall, it had comedic brilliance to it, didn't it? So he had comedy's usually around threes. This was a four, but he had a build-up, three qualifications. Then he couldn't remember the fourth, comic pause, and then it was communication, wasn't it? I mean, you couldn't have scripted it better. So, and I think that was right. That undermines his credibility again, because if you can't remember your own qualifications, maybe you're lying. There's sort of subtext to that, isn't it? You know, so you have to be a bit careful there.
So on that as well, it's like reading a CV out rather than like a story of your passion or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. If you wanted to get your CV, you know, your attributes, your qualifications even into a speech, how would you do it if you didn't do it through listing at the top, saying I've got a degree in this and you know, whatever? How would you let the audience know these things about yourself without looking like a great big show off?
Maybe like link it to an anecdote when
Yeah,
you're a student.
Yeah, exactly. There's no harm in letting people know that, you know, if you're running for county treasurer and telling us that you have an accountancy qualification or something, yeah, fine. But you need to say, one thing I learned when I was doing my accountancy qualification was that I do sort of expression of politics. So, you know, you do something like that. So all we're hearing is you've got a qualification, but it's not like, look at me, I've got a big certificate. So through anecdote, and as you mentioned anecdotes, what's the function of an anecdote in a speech? What is an anecdote in a speech? What is it? What is it? What's it?
It's like storytelling.
Yeah, it's a story, isn't it? Where does the word come from?
So, like,
It's from Greek rhetoric, so it's a Greek word, and it's anecdote, isn't it? You can hear the Greekness in there. I don't speak Greek, but that's what it is. And I did try that out on a Greek student the other day, and she said, yeah, it's Greek. For anecdote. So, okay, so a lot of our rhetorical devices do come from the Greeks and the Romans. So they are Eurocentric, but they're not in English. You know, we've translated them into English, so you can get away with these things by saying they don't belong to the English language. We're not being a colonialist or anything. It's just straightforward rhetoric that works with the human brain. Very good. Let's move on. So here's your basics if you're writing a speech. I'm not going to read all these out, but you know, you can think about some of those. The news line is important. My constant refrain with politicians is this a secret speech? or do we want people to know about it? And they go, well, we'd like people to know about it. Well, it needs a newsline, doesn't it? It needs something that people can pick up, an announcement or something new, something different, whatever. That needs to be in there. And of course, there needs to be the social media clip, because people are not consuming the whole of a speech, are they? They're consuming a little bit, often maybe just 7 or 8 seconds. And there's, I think, the one politician of our modern times has really nailed this, I'm afraid, is Donald Trump. He was absolutely brilliant in his social media of his speeches. I mean, he was a terrible person, obviously, and evil in many ways, but his ability to just use a speech as the platform to get social media clips up across his many millions of followers on Twitter was awesome. And he created his own media through that. And I never saw a whole Donald Trump speech. I bet he was rubbish, you know, in the round. But the clips, what can you remember from his election speeches? What were some of his slogans? What was he going to promise? On the wall. Build the wall. Yeah. What was he going to do with Washington?
Drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp. What was he going to do to Hillary Clinton?
Lock her up.
Lock her up. 3 words, single syllables mostly, clear, you know, visual metaphors. I did meet an American once who said that they thought he was really actually going to build the wall. I said, I think it may be a metaphor. I'm not sure, you know, but sure, no, he said that he's going to build the wall. You see how long that border is? I don't think he is. Anyway, but as the metaphor is brilliant, I'm afraid. It's evil brilliance, isn't it? Because people are frightened, they're discombobulated by the 4th industrial revolution, they're losing their jobs to technology. And you can blame the other, and you can say, I'm going to build a wall. And that is just awful, evil populist politics, but very effective. So does it pack a punch? Does it have that message in there as well? Something else too, we were just talking about this, weren't we? The Mrs. Smith test is, can it be understood and repeated by somebody not in politics, just somebody reading it or hearing about it on LBC or something? Does it have a kind of resonance? Because in political writing, of course, we're trying to reach an audience who want to engage with us, don't we? Not necessarily just talking to ourselves, I think. Now, a couple of times I've talked about credibility and the credibility of the speaker. There's a sort of a triptych, again from the Greek, this is Aristotle actually, which you may have come across, which is ethos, pathos, and logos. Have you ever heard of this? This is a good takeaway, because this comes up a lot if you do speech writing courses. So what is it then? You were nodding, saging. What can you remember what the bits are?
So ethos thinks of emotion, pathos is looking like sympathy, pity, logos gives me, but
something like that. So pathos is the emotional content, appeals to love or fear or hope or whatever. Logos is the opposite of that. So what does that sound like? Logos. Yeah, so the rational argument, the facts, the figures, the Gordon Brown end of the market, basically. Here are some numbers, you know, sort of tracks and statistics, you know, all that. And then the ethos is your standing as a speaker, your credibility as a speaker. Now, if you're writing for yourselves or somebody else, how do you build in credibility into your speech? How do you get that? How do speakers do it when they are in front of an audience, whether it's a selection or a party meeting or anything?
Confidence.
Yeah, so they use their non-verbals, even if they're just faking it, they look confident.
Share some sort of personal story.
Yeah, to build their credibility. Yeah, personal stories go an awfully long way, don't they? I mean, it's a real gift if you can tell stories. Everyone loves storytelling. Usually, this I'm not doing it today because I'm exhausted, but normally the speaker would stand up, wouldn't they? So they'd be higher up than the audience, simple as that. And we put people on stages, don't we, with lights and a build-up. Somebody introduces them, so they sort of establish credibility. That if you're writing for an MP, the fact is that they're the MP, so normally he just about, that's still a respected figure in society. So you know that builds their ethos. So you need to think about the ways to build ethos in. And the point Aristotle makes here is not that you choose which one of these you want to do. This is all of them. So you have to balance it up. There's a lovely Maya Angelou quote there, which is true, isn't it? People don't remember what you said necessarily, but they will remember how you felt. Anyone been in the room when a speech has made your heart leap or your spirit soar? Have you had that experience? Oh, you will. It's brilliant. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have heard Barbara Castle, I've heard Nelson Mandela, I've heard Neil Kinnock, all the Blair speeches. I've been to 32 Labour Party conferences, so I've seen lots of really good speeches come and go. And in a good moment, in that excitement and sleep deprivation and, you know, all the rest of it, and the sense of joy and hope that we are finally going to win, or whatever it might be, it can carry you. It can be almost sort of, like a euphoric moment. So that's how you feel. If you were to ask me 20 minutes later, well, what did Nelson Mandela actually say? I'm not sure. I can't remember. Something about apartheid. You know what I mean? We don't remember the words. We remember how he made us feel. Great man. And Clinton, I saw Bill Clinton. He was brilliant. Anyway, so let's think about writing a speech then. And my metaphor of choice is, we've only got about 15 minutes left. We maybe do a bit longer. Can we see how we feel? See how we feel. Yeah, I'm on a roll now. Think about the building metaphor. So it's about the material that goes into it, but that's not where you end, is it? It's about the content. I don't know what your content is. You know what your content is. Don't stop there. You need to think about how you're going to structure it. And a speech, as I was saying earlier, does not have any of the rules of writing of a document or an essay or anything else that you might be used to. It has its own structure. And again, very broadly, what would you say a structure was for a speech? You probably did this at some point in your careers. How do you structure a speech? It's a sort of classic structure that most speeches have.
It's usually big build up, get down to the middle, pick up again at the end.
Yeah, so three parts.
Yeah.
And if you've got something important to say, when would you say it in a speech?
Beginning and the end.
Beginning and the end, yeah, exactly. And if it's in the middle, they won't hear it, will they? Because their attentions have drained away. So you've got a grace period at the beginning and you've got a bit of attention at the end. If you hide it in the middle, no chance. If you say it twice, you've got a better chance. So it's the old thing of tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you've told them. You may have heard that. Or even if it's most simple, a beginning, a middle, and an end. But each of those sections is doing something a bit different. And we normally end a speech on a call to arms, or a sort of, rousing point or something inspirational or something to finish off. So you need to know, the audience needs to know that the speaker has finished. And it's obvious they're building up. If maybe they pick up the pace, the volume might go a little bit louder, maybe a triad with three, and so on. Your role as a speechwriter, let's just spend a minute on this. All of these things, you ask the question, do you have to be a good writer? And there we are, yes, you do. And as I was saying, storytelling, absolutely. Why do I say clairvoyant? Which obviously is not a real thing, but the idea of clairvoyance, being able to see in the future. Why do I say that? Well, you've got to write a speech. You've got to write a speech in 3 weeks' time. Okay, so you've got to write it now for 3 weeks' time. What's your first instinct in that situation? What should you do?
Think what's going to be happening.
Yeah, look in the calendar, see what the date is. Is it a particular date? Look at the government agenda. Is it the day after the trade figures? Is it the day before the COVID inquiry is announced? Is it the morning that Manchester United are playing in the 4th round? What is it that's going on? And what will be in mind? Is it Pancake Day? Is it Valentine's Day? Is it Beyonce's birthday? What is it that might be in popular culture in the mind of the audience? Then you've got to think about where is it? The speech is about context, isn't it? It's not just words out loud. It's about where we are and the moment in time that it takes place. And that's what a speech is. It's not before, not after. It's not the transcript. It's not the PowerPoints. It's a person in a room talking to people then, and you can't do it twice. So clairvoyance, yeah.
What do you do if you maybe know that you don't have a certain piece of information, and do you leave a gap in the speech or something?
You can do, of
How do you deal with
course.
that?
Most speeches are the work of many hands, aren't they? So there will be other people you can draw in. So your role might be to fact check, but it might hopefully be someone else's job.
No, but I mean, like, you might not find something out that might be relevant until really late in the process. You have to write it.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes there's no mounting the podium, you're just scribbling in, or in their ear, What's the Norwich MP?
Labour.
Yeah,
Clive Lewis.
So Clive Lewis is delivering a speech to conference, isn't he? And they are rewriting his speech on the autocue as he's delivering it, because he wanted to say something about Trident, and the people behind the scenes wanted him to say something else about Trident. So there's a chaos within the Corbyn camp, and he gets to that point and he reads out something that he's never even seen before. True story. So it's not a speech until somebody says it out loud.
So you'll finish it up completely.
You try and lock it
or
down.
leave gaps.
You try and lock it down a reasonable time ahead, but you mustn't then not update it if something happens. So let's say you're writing, and this has happened in real life. Actually, I went to a progress conference where ministers were speaking, and they were speaking first slot in the morning. And obviously they'd locked down their speech. It was Caroline Flint, actually. The night before, they locked down the speech. Overnight, there was some terrible catastrophe I forget which one, but possibly the Bali bombing or a tsunami or something awful happened in the world. So at breakfast and into the conference, that's what we're thinking about. That's what we're talking about. Oh my God, have you seen the news? It's awful. And in the speech, there's no mention of it. So that immediately created this kind of weird dislocation between what we're thinking and what she's saying, and why is she going to mention it? Because she's just reading out a speech that somebody had written yesterday afternoon. So you've always got to update and fact check and make sure it's up to date. And then why a mind reader? Again, not a real thing, but why does she have to be a mind reader? What's going on in this picture, by the way? I mean, who's the other guy that isn't the barber? Yes, that is the speechwriting. Anyone know his name? Oh.
Ben.
Close, it's John.
John.
It's called John Favreau, but not the actor. Yeah. It's a different John Favreau. And he wrote all of the campaign speeches, and then the first few years into the White House. And look at what does the picture speak to you? What does it say to you as a piece of semiotics?
Abominizing it. Thinking tips, so I like this better.
Yeah. What's the power relationship between the two men?
Does look like Obama's more confident, more in control than John is.
Yeah, it's fair. But what's the relative status, would you say?
So it must be apprentice.
So isn't it? I don't think he is. It's the opposite of that. I think they're both sitting on a sofa as equals, pretty much. One is slightly more elevated than the other, perhaps. He's not sitting behind a big desk, though, is he? I mean, Donald Trump didn't do that, did he, for example? I think it's a nice moment where the two people are coming together, the speaker and the writer, collaborating on a shared task. And I know it's a stage trope, I'm not an idiot, you know what I mean? They were just casually snap doing this, but it does look like there is this relationship of quite a close relationship between the two men. And that's what a speechwriter should be, somebody who can read the mind of the person they're writing for, and you can hear their voice in their head.
If you don't know a candidate very well,
it's very hard, isn't it?
Is it hard to get?
You can't write for a stranger. You can't write for a stranger. I always insist on talking to the person in real life.
Yeah.
Before I write a speech for them. I worked for Hazel Blair's for a long time, and when she was a minister and Secretary of State, and I had her voice in my head most mornings, just I could just channel her voice into my speech. I remember once sitting in the department, and I could hear her voice in my head. I looked out the window. She was just making a speech. So that's the point where you want to quit. The thing about that is, of course, it's entirely non-transferable, isn't it? It's no good at all. The next person you have to write for, you have to reinvent their relationship. But in that moment, mind reading and ghostwriting is, of course, something you should be invisible. So John F. Kennedy won a Pulitzer Prize for profiles in courage. He didn't write it. It was a ghostwriter. I know. So the person that writes the speech is not somebody who should be famous and putting it around. They wrote the speech and telling everyone, "Oh, I wrote the speech." Good. What about putting words in the mouth of a politician that do not sound like them and sound like they may be written by somebody else? Did you ever read about this one? So Gordon Brown becomes the Shadow Chancellor in 1994, and he gives the first big speech on the economy, and he talks about the post-neoclassical endogenous growth theory. Now, is Brown an economist, first of all?
No,
he's not. He's done very well for himself, but he's an historian and a politician. Yeah. Anyone here an economist? No, of course not.
We'll take the chat.
Well, that's. He's trying to sound like an economist, and of course, he was immediately outed as somebody who was just reading out Ed Bull's work for it. It was he that had written it. He is an economist, and in fact, there he is. Look at how young they all look.
David, Ed, and then Ed.
Terrifying, isn't it? So that's Charlie Wheeler.
Oh, Charlie Wheeler, sorry.
So he was the spin doctor, Ed Balls, and then that 12-year-old in Liverpool.
He looks so lanky in that Blair and Brown documentary.
Doesn't he? He was this child. The work experience kid was wandered in. So you can't write. You've got to write to the style of the person, right? It's got to sound like them, otherwise you'll be caught out. This is a sort of similar example, I suppose. Now, do you think that Jeremy Corbyn has ever said those words out loud? And if indeed he has said them out loud, do you think he understands what they are?
He's my MP, and I can tell you that is not him.
Yeah, exactly. I first met him in 1988 and watched him deliver a speech, and I wasn't impressed there. And it certainly wouldn't have said this, would he? You know, so you've got to be true to the person. You've got to channel them. Something else is about language. This is the famous Ed Stone. You've got to have concrete language that means something that people can remember. This was the election in 2015, isn't it? This is the point of the Ed Stone, you may recall, was that he was going to put this in the Downing Street garden. It's a real, it's not a Photoshop. There's a real stone with this stuff written on it, like a big 8-foot flint. He was going to put it in the garden so he could look out the window and remind himself of his pledges to the British people every morning as he was brushing his teeth or whatever. But what's the obvious problem with this language? If you think about this kind of language, it's political communications. What's the issue?
It's very big, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, isn't it? What, I mean, what is an NHS with time to care?
I always thought that at the time as I was going around canvassing, that was my first general election. I was like, what is this?
What is this?
Why am I given this pledge card? And what does it mean?
I mean, post by an action on red, so we bring them up. I mean, what's the action we're going to start? You know, we're going to double them for me. Higher than what? Strong, as opposed to what precisely? None of it makes any sense. It's all even controls. What controls on who, where? You know, it's entirely unquantifiable. If you set something as the thing I'm going to hold myself account for, and then it's just completely vague, then it's meaningless, isn't it?
Do you think another weakness of it is that they're all like very, this is kind of so agreeable that it means nothing? Like, who would disagree with a strong economic
Yeah, exactly. We're the weak economy party, and we think there should be a
Yeah,
weaker economy. Yeah, and the opposites test is a good one to apply to your speeches. If somebody can, you know, if the opposite is absurd, then you need to be a bit more concrete. So concrete language, anyway.
So Owen on the chat.
Yeah.
I remember I didn't understand the problem people had with the Ed Stone until I actually read the pledges. Which I think yeah, it's very true.
They destroyed it, didn't they? You see Sarah Owen in the picture, by the way, who was our poor benighted candidate in Hastings, who did not win, obviously, and then went off to Luton and did become the MP there. But her face, I think, speaks.
Didn't it end up in a restaurant in Kensington? That rumor, I think it did actually get destroyed, but there's a rumor around like 2016, 2017 that it was like it was somewhere in Kensington.
I think it's in Landfill there, isn't it? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
The thing about the structure I described of beginning, middles, and end, just something else. I'm sorry, I'm being a bit disjointed, but do use the signposts to help the audience know where they are. So you would say, I've got 3 points to make, and here's my 1 point, 2 point, 3 points, you know. Or the best signpost of all is when you say, and finally, or to conclude, or my last thought is just some signal to the audience that you're about to stop. And what is the effect of that on an audience?
They listen up.
They listen up, don't they? And even if they drifted away in the middle, which they would have done, then they will think, oh shit, I better listen, and I might miss something. So fear of missing out kicks in, and then we'll listen to the last bit, which is why we repeat the key message at the end as well as the start, because they are listening. You imagine a kind of crooked smile, so attention levels high, then they dip low, and they just spark up a little bit at the end, and that's the beginning and the end. You get the point across.
How do you deal with that? Surely, like the bit in the middle, then did you put filler in? Like what?
Just building blocks. So you know, you've got a story in there. What you try and do is spark up a bit of attention. So a story where an anecdote works well because you can change the pace, the tone. You can almost do it as though it's just you thought of it.
Yeah.
That reminds me, you know.
Yeah.
And you can introduce characters, voices, scenes. It just changes the tone of it, doesn't it? So it's a good way to. Or in if you watch TED Talks, they show you a video at that point, don't they? When your attention span is flagging, they go and watch this, and then suddenly everyone's back in the room. So change direction, or you can pick on people. You know, ask a question. What do you think? You know, and suddenly everyone's like, shit. We're going to see what you say, but then we're also wondering what happens if I get asked. So you know, bring people in like that, or hands up if you know you can do anything. Audience attraction kind of devices just to sort of liven it up a bit. Translate these words into Anglo-Saxon then, so they're all Latinate words, which is the death of speeches. You need short, sharp Anglo-Saxon. So do we facilitate in our speeches? No. What do we do?
Make.
Yes, we can do that. Couldn't we? Participate.
Join.
Could be. Remunerate.
Okay.
Correct. Commence.
Start.
Construct.
Build.
Occupation.
Job.
Purchase.
Buy.
Consume.
Eat.
Terminate.
Use.
Yeah.
End. Stop. Halt. So you can hear, because the English language is an amalgam of all these languages, isn't it? You can hear that the shorter, sharper Germanic Anglo-Saxon version is usually stronger, better, often single syllable, not always, but it's just a better than the flowery Latinate. Now, I'm not saying always write in a sort of short, sharp, staccato fashion, but you do need to think about shorter, sharper words because they're usually a better word. Same goes for painting pictures because we can't see it. You've got the thing in front of you, but we don't have it in front of us until you can paint a picture. So using imagery, here's a terrible slide with lots of words on it, but there's Michelle Obama. So I told you about our daughters, the heart of our hearts, the center of our world. During our time in the White House, the joy of watching them grow from bubbly little girls to poised young women. Yada, 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 first day at school. I'll never forget the winter morning as I watched the girls hide into those black SUVs and all those big men with guns. And I saw their little faces pressed up against the window. And the only thing I could think was, what have we done? So what size were the guns? What size were the men? Yeah, what size were the faces? What colour was the SUV? What was the temperature? Yeah, and then a little payoff of humour at the end. Yeah, not a joke, but a little humorous aside. So these kind of descriptors, feelings, anything that can summon up a kind of sense works. Storytelling we've talked about. Look at these two anecdotes. I'm not going to read these out. You can read these yourself. One of them is very, very flawed indeed. Let's see if we can spot the one.
Apologies to people online who might not quite be able to read that.
Well, I'll read the one. I'll read the flawed one. I was in Plymouth recently, and a 40-year-old black man made the point to me. He said, "I came here when I was 6, and I served in the Royal Navy for 30 years." Anyone want to do the maths on that? Yeah. So, A, why is this racial density in any way interesting? And secondly, it doesn't add up, does it? It doesn't stack up. You don't recruit people into the Navy at whatever age. 6 years old or whatever. So the anecdote falls to pieces. I think this was Cameron because he was famous for crap anecdotes that didn't make sense. His favourite shop had closed down 6 years earlier. He claimed to be, was it West Ham fan?
I was going to say which football team.
Yeah, it was Aston Villa. Blair did this a couple of times. He claimed to have watched Jackie Milburn play for Newcastle 3 years after Jackie Milburn had retired. So that would be quite hard.
That was a myth, wasn't it?
Is it?
Yeah,
Oh, is it? Okay,
yeah.
no, sorry,
Sorry.
It's a learn. Anyway, if you're doing an anecdote, make sure it works and it stacks up and you can prove it if challenged. And how do you feel about the social media clip? And then we'll finish off with the top diagnosis and then we'll let you all go. So I think somebody that got quite good at this was Corbyn. He was good at building in his social media clips into his Prime Minister's questions. Often they would make no sense at all in the context of what was going on, but they just clipped it and they bunged it out, and all of his fans, saw him doing this in the House of Commons, even though it landed badly and the Tories ignored it, blah, blah. It was just a freestanding clip. So you do need to think about your clip. And in the olden days, we'd always think about what's called a sound bite for the media. So we'd always have something in the speech that was aimed at the media, and we would underline it and tell the journalists, look, this is the bit we want you to cover, and hope that they would. When Gordon Brown as Prime Minister was being challenged for the Prime Ministership by David Miliband, he had a line in his leader's speech at conference, which was, "This is no time for a novice." Okay. Now, overtly, that was supposed to be about Cameron and saying, there's no point, because don't change horses. But David McBride had told the media to pan to David Miliband at that exact moment. So Brown says, "This is no time for a novice." And then the TV viewers all see David Miliband in that second. So that was the clip, wasn't it? That's what they wanted to do. Do you know, no, evil, right? Do you know the Rivers of Blood speech, Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, again, evil speech. But the very famous bit in there, which is like the Roman, I see the Tiber foaming with much blood, which is where we get rivers of blood from. It's not recorded because nobody tipped off the journalists in the room, and there was just a BBC Midlands TV crew there. They'd all gone for a fag out the back, and there's going to tell you on a bit, should go for a cigarette anyway. And that bit wasn't recorded because nobody said this is the soundbite. Like the Roman, I see the type of foaming with much blood. So obviously the print, but the actual recording doesn't exist. So for M's sake, if you've got a soundbite, then tell us it and make sure we'll get your team to clip it and whatever else. So Finally, then, rhetorical devices. This is the stuff that turns you've got good content there, you've got good structure. And this is the stuff that elevates your speech into the sphere of marvelousness and memory. So any on there that you want to pick out and talk about, done some of them, there's others there that you may know already, and some of those you don't, maybe, I don't know. Talked about quotations, haven't we? Talked about imagery, humour we've touched on. The occasional rhyme can work well. What's a contrasting pair, anybody?
Is that not just in the Michelle Obama thing, like big
Yeah.
and small faces?
Yeah, and it could be even more overt. It could be, you know, north, south, east,
Yeah.
west. Men, women, you know, it could be just all kinds of contrasting pairs like that. Yeah.
What about the groups of three?
That's my personal favourite. This is the one that most people use. So we all across tricolons or groups of three. Can you think of one? A group of three from a speech. Education. Yeah, which is a type of tricolon where there's no conjunctions. That's called asyndeton because all the ands have been taken out. Although, do you know what? If you actually watch the clip, he slips an and in wrongly. So at least the sort of record of it, the words recorded are education, but what he actually says is and education. It's very hard to do. Anyway, so education. What else?
Kind of like a list, like 3 things fixing just improve such kind of.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It doesn't have to be single words, it could be sentences.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the definition of democracy in the Gettysburg Address? Government of the people.
By the people.
By the people. For the people. 1, 2, 3. What's the Trinity in the Bible? Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. What about what do you hear on the tube endlessly?
See it, say it, sorted.
See it, say it, sorted.
Oh.
See it, say it, sorted. What did we supposed to do during COVID? What do we have to do? Hands, face, space.
Stay at home, protect the
What did the
NHS, same
Romans?
line.
Sorry, what?
Yeah. Stay at home, protect the NHS, same line.
Yeah, exactly. What was the Romans when they rocked up on the south coast, not far from where I live, and they said
The one I was thinking of, yeah.
they said in Latin or English, I don't remember which.
Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered.
Came, I saw, I conquered. What's the French Revolutionary slogan from 1789?
Liberty, equality, fraternity.
Fraternity, very good. What's the Russian Revolutionary slogan from 1917?
Red, peace, and
Land.
Yeah.
Can you hear these? That's at least 5 different languages.
2000 years of history.
That's my little list. And you know, they pop up all over the shop. And so they are an absolute mainstay of speech writing. Things in 3. The Romans said, omne trium perfectum, everything 3 is perfect. It's also true, isn't it, in literature? 3 Little Pigs, 3 Musketeers.
3 Blind Mice.
3 Blind Mice, yeah, absolutely.
3 is magic number.
3 is the magic number. In photography, it's all about 3s. Everything's 3. Play, 3-act play. Yeah, magic, isn't it? Here's Hugh Gateskill, one of our great heroes. Doing a 3. No, fight and fight again. Now can you see he's put the ands in? So that's called polysynthesis, where you put the ands into a statement, even though it's not grammatical. So we'll fight and fight again. Do you know what he was fighting for?
Or nuclear deterrent?
Yeah, he was saying we'll retain the nuclear deterrent. And you can see that later he says sanity and honesty and dignity. So that's the bit less reported. But he does it again towards the end. Even if you use lots of 3s, nobody will even mind, you know, you can do it a lot.
And he's making a root signal to Ghana.
And he's telling the Ghanaians to go fuck them others. Right, repetition. I mentioned repetition, 2 kinds broadly. Anaphora is repetition at the start of the sentence, like we should fight, etc. Epistrophe is repetition at the end, together. So you've got a little bit of leeway here. You can do different types of repetition. Where are the 2 quotes from then?
Well, the first one is Churchill and the surrender of France.
It is, yeah. Second one's a bit harder. It's from the I Have a Dream speech, and it's the building up to his what's called a peroration. The peroration is the end of the speech. Martin Luther King sort of heading up towards his free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last at Triclon. alliterative, and a quote, all at the end of that speech. Why do you think, as we're all political types, Churchill says, "We shall fight," 5, 6, 7 times? I've talked about rhythm and poetry, but sometimes there's a political meaning and message, isn't there? Not random. So why does he say that? If you've seen the movie, you'll know this, but
Just like a single mission, kind of unity. And
yes, he is. I mean, that's the broader point. But what's the internal political?
Wasn't there pressure on to sue for peace?
Yeah, exactly. It's war cabinet. There were people like Halifax who said we should do a deal with Hitler. We should do a classic land for peace deal, and we should give them some Caribbean islands from the Empire, and it promised of not invading mainland England. And so he won the vote 3-2. You know, of such things politics are made, right? So he wanted to repeat this phrase, "We shall fight," because that was his core political message. And why does Martin Luther King say "together, together, 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 together" so many times? What was the politics behind his civil rights movement and what was going on inside his campaign? Again, it doesn't choose this word randomly.
It was the split with the Malcolm X.
Yeah, exactly. So the black nationalists who are saying, well, we don't want to be together, there's the white folks on the problem. They got us into this mess in the first place. They're not going to help us. We need to do this ourselves, which was the classic Nation of Islam argument. So Martin Luther King is on the other side of that argument and saying we need a broad coalition. So together, together, together. You know, so judge the words as political meaning as well. This is Neil Kinnock doing his anecdotes and rhetorical questions all the way through. And again, I'm not going to read this out, but if you want to Google it in your own time, have a look at this speech where he's talking about why he's the first Kinnock, that's his surname, obviously, the first Kinnock in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university. An American politician plagiarized this and had to drop out of the presidential race a few years later. Do you know who that was? Joe Biden. I know. Imagine that. So the point I'm making, just finally finishing off, is that we have an amazing array of rhetorical devices. Are these on the board? Are just a tiny, tiny subset. You know, Google it and look. And then my advice is just, you know, when you're writing a speech, just try out some different ones. Stretch your legs a bit. Just try things that you've never done before. Don't necessarily tell the person you're writing for. Just slip them in, see what happens. You know, see the audience reaction. They work. Greeks and the Romans told us that they worked years ago, and they're still true today. They work in every language across continents and cultures. Something about the brain likes this kind of thing. So, you know, slip them in and use them, and you'll build up your own kind of toolkit that you'll just start naturally writing in these terms, because rhetorical devices are the DNA of speech writing. It's not magic dust you sprinkle on top. This is how you write a speech, okay? So there we are. I think that's probably enough. Just to finish off then, make sure you know what you're trying to say. What is your political message? Can you fit it on a post-it? In other words, is it short and to the point? Has it a clear structure, beginning, middle, and end? Tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then do you signpost them through so they know where we are? A language, is it compelling? Is there a soundbite, stroke, social media clip, and does it have the ethos, the pathos, and the logos? Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions or comments or anything else. But other than that, that's me.
That's great, Paul. Thank you very much.
Well done.
We'll have sort of maybe 5 minutes for questions, perhaps. I don't know if anybody wants to ask online as well or in the room. I'll give people a minute to kind of type it out, if not, or just, you know.
We've got plenty, we've got a lot as well. So
yeah,
yeah.
But we'll give it a minute.
If anybody online does want to, otherwise we'll
yeah, either type or speak now, raise your hand.
So I've got one for a Tory MP. I'm working in public affairs, so I'm doing it for a Tory MP.
Yeah.
Clients, parliamentary reception, they're doing this 1 minute, and they have to, you know, be quite complimentary about the charity involved.
Yeah.
You know, never met him, never spoke to him.
Well, they probably won't use the speech though, will they? You know, you'll
Well,
write a
they've
speech
been asked us to do it.
Good feedback will be whether they do just read it out or whether they'll, you know, adopt it and use it and put themselves into it.
But it's just quite difficult to go, like, you know, to try to do any of this, but, you know, because it's like, because it's also probably he finds it boring, isn't it, for some corporate, you know, organization. I get that. It's probably quite boring for people to hear. It's just quite difficult to think. How are you going to like line
if you have
that?
time and the inclination, I would phone their office up and say, you know, has he got a favourite story or a favourite joke or something? Is it something that this guy or is it a woman or whoever it is, we can put into the speech, so it's not just a dry speaking note from a disembodied person that you've never met. You know, if you can get something of them in there, then that's worth trying. But other than that, I would just do, I mean, I would actually not write a speech. I would just say, here are some key points that you can adopt and use in your 1 minute. And if you want to top and tail it with a story of why you're involved and if there's a personal connection and why it matters to you and your constituency and all that, then great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we do some political messaging, but not.
Yeah, good thinking.
I wrote a speech for a leading Lambeth councillor this week in the budget debate, and I did note that he read it out word for word, and it's a bit terrifying because I often write these things quite quickly. And I sort of always assume someone else is going to check it and make sure everything's all right, and they'll go through some sort of process. And it just I think, well, what did I go wrong? And he's reading it out in the chamber, It was fine, but so you really hope someone's going to look at it right before it gets read out loud. The other gig I have is the National Kebab Awards that were last night, or the night before. I've had to write a speech saying something new about kebabs for 11 years in a row now. I think it's very hard.
Who delivers it?
It's Ibrahim Dojas, who's the founder
Okay.
of the National Kebab Awards, and it's a really terrible gig because no one is listening. They're all eating kebabs and chatting and drinking, and he's talking about quite important messaging around small businesses, and no one's there listening. And he always wants quite long speeches, and I was saying, please, no one's listening. Ibrahim, just 3 minutes. Thanks for coming. Sit down. But no.
How did the Nadine Zahawi, I was talking to donors a few months ago, but now I'm talking to donors. How did that go down? I heard about it. Did it go down well?
That's what you said.
Apparently that's what he said.
I didn't go, I have to say.
Oh, you didn't go.
I couldn't bear. I did have the option, but anyway, yeah, no, it's only somebody's a great line. Hilarious, self-aware, self-facing.
How about you got a bit like any tips for like trying to win over like a slightly hostile crowd?
I think you just have to be terribly honest, and if it's a crowd, like a public meeting or something where people are angry about something, you have to let them vent and steam out, and actually do your listening face and your listening skills, and soak it up. I remember going to a public meeting in Hammersmith where they were doing some development that the community was very against, and the council officer came. He had this nervous thing in his face that made him look like he was grinning. They looked like he was smiling as he was saying that we're going to be knocking down your houses and and I've never seen an audience as angry. I mean, people were getting increasingly furious, so they're lucky to get our lives. So you have to let people vent and take it on the chin a bit, and then try and put your correct point across. But you have to start by soaking it up, I would say.
Great.
Any more for you all? Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed that.
No worries at all. Any final checks online? No worries if not.
Cool. Thank you very much.
That's great.
Thanks, guys, online. Well done.
Thank you, everybody. See you soon. Take care. Have a good night. Bye.